Good day to you. Joshua here. Have you ever lied to someone? Not just a singular lie, but have you ever kept something from someone? Maybe when they ask you about something, you didn't tell them the truth. I think of me in college, and I had a semester where I wasn't doing very good at all academically. I ended up failing a few courses. But I remember throughout the semester, my parents would call me and they say, "Hey, you're doing good. How are classes going?" And me not knowing that me knowing that I wasn't doing well would say, "Yeah, everything's going good. Classes are going good, making good grades, all of those things." And when I'd go home and I'd eat supper with my parents, we'd talk about school and we'd talk about classes, and they'd ask me how my grades were. And I would tell them that they were good. And at the end of the day, at the end of the semester, they weren't. Even more so than that, here at Leoma, we have a scholarship for people that go to Christian universities. Where I grew up in Boonville had the same thing. So I had one elder who was over that scholarship program, and he would ask me throughout the semester, "How are classes going? How are your grades?" And I remember not telling him the truth. I remember withholding that information. And it got to the point, by the end of the semester, I would avoid him at church because I knew he would ask me. And I didn't want that confrontation. I just didn't want to lie to him like I had time and time again. So we get to the end of the semester, and I have to end up telling them because my final grades come in, and I failed some classes. So have you ever done that with anyone? Have you ever kept something from someone, even to the point of lying to them when they ask you about it? Keep that thought and go with me to the book of John. John chapter 13. John chapter 13, and we're going to read verses 21 all the way down to verse 30. John chapter 13, verses 21 through 30. After saying these things, Jesus was troubled in his spirit and testified, "Truly, truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me." The disciples looked at one another, uncertain of whom he spoke. One of his disciples, whom Jesus loved, was reclining at the table at Jesus' side. So Simon Peter motioned to him to ask Jesus of whom he was speaking. So that disciple, leaning back against Jesus, said to him, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus answered, "It is he to whom I will give this morsel of bread when I have dipped it." So when he had dipped the morsel, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. Then after he had taken the morsel, Satan entered into him. And Jesus said to him, "What you are going to do quickly." Now no one at the table knew why he had said this to him. Some thought that because Judas had had the money bag, Jesus was telling him, "Buy what we need for the feast," or that he should give something to the poor. So, after receiving their morsel of bread, he immediately went out, and it was night. Here we're in the final week, the final days of Jesus' life, and they're sitting around the table at the Last Supper that Jesus would partake in. And he looks up and he says, one of my friends, one of you people that I've known for 3 years and mentored for 3 years, you're going to betray me. So Peter and some other ones were like, "Jesus, which one is it? Which one of us is going to betray you?" And he said, "It is he to whom I will give this morsel of bread when I have dipped it." So, took his bread, and he dipped it, and then he gave it to Judas. And he says to Judas, "What you're going to do it quickly." And then he left. And the other apostles didn't know what he was talking about. I can't imagine being around the table and one of your friends, Jesus, says that your other friend is going to betray him. I'm sure that wouldn't make sense to me either. So at this point, after Jesus gives him the bread and he leaves, I would assume that he does something. Now what does he do? My whole life, I've thought that at this point, he's gone out. Jesus has prophesied that he's going to do this. So at this point, my assumption is that he goes and talks to the chief priest, and he gives him, basically says, "I will give you Jesus to have and to kill and to do whatever you want to with him." And the priests give him 30 pieces of silver. Now, my whole life, I've thought that Jesus prophesied this, and that then Judas goes and meets with the priests, and then they arrest Jesus. But before I make that assumption, go with me to Luke chapter 22. Luke chapter 22. Just one book over. Luke chapter 22. Start reading with me in verse 3. Luke chapter 2, starting in verse 3. "Then Satan entered into Judas, called Iscariot, who was of the number of the 12. He went away and conferred with the chief priests and officers, and how he might betray him to them. And they were glad, and agreed to give him money. So he consented, and sought an opportunity to betray him to them in the absence of a crowd." So here we see Judas and going and meeting the priest, and the priests were happy. The priests were trying to kill him. So all of a sudden one of his 12 come and say, "Hey, I'll give Jesus to you." So they're happy. So Judas, from that point, he consented and sought an opportunity to betray him to them in the absence of a crowd. Keep reading with me. In verse 7. "Then came the day of the unleavened bread, on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. So Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, 'Go and prepare the Passover for us, that we may eat it.' They said to him, 'Where will you have us prepare it?' He said to them, 'Behold, when you have entered the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him into the house that enters, and tell the master of the house, the teacher says to you, where is the guest room, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? And he will show it to you, a large upper room furnished, and prepare it there.' And they went and found it, just as he had told them. And they prepared the Passover." Now, verses 14 all the way down to 20, this is when Jesus institutes the Lord's Supper. So we're going to skip that part. Verses 14 through 20, this is the institution of the Lord's Supper. So jump down with me to verse 21. "But behold, the hand of him who betrays me is with me on the table. For the Son of Man goes as it has been determined, but woe to that man by whom he is betrayed." And they began to question one another which of them it could be who is going to do this. So, same thing. Jesus says, someone's going to betray me. And they ask, who's it going to be? Go with me to Mark, another book over. Mark chapter 14. Mark chapter 14. And we're going to start in verse 10. John chapter 14, starting in verse 10. "Then Judas Iscariot, who is one of the 12, went to the chief priests in order to betray him to them. And when they heard it, they were glad and promised to give him money. And he sought an opportunity to betray him. Verse 12. And on the first day of the unleavened bread, when they sacrificed the Passover lamb, his disciples said to him, Where will you have us go and prepare for you to eat the Passover? And he sent 2 of his disciples and said to them, Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him, and wherever he enters, say to the master of the house, The teacher says, Where is my guest room, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? And he will show you a large upper room furnished and ready. There, prepare for us. And the disciples set out and went to the city and found it, just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover. And when it was evening, he came with the 12. And as they were reclining at the table and eating, Jesus said, Truly I say to you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me. They began to be sorrowful and to say to him, one after another, Is it I? He said to them, It is one of the 12, one who is dipping bread into the dish with me. For the Son of Man goes as it is written of him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that man if he had never been born. So, same thing here. They're eating the Passover meal, and Jesus says, somebody's going to betray me. And then we get another detail here. They began to be sorrowful and to say to him, one after another, Is it I? Now lastly, go with me to the book of Matthew. Go with me to Matthew chapter 26. Matthew chapter 26, starting in verse 14. Then one of the 12, whose name was Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, What will you give me if I deliver him over to you? And they paid him 30 pieces of silver. And from that moment he sought an opportunity to betray him. Verse 17. Now on the first day of the unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus saying, Where will you have us prepare for you to eat the Passover? And then verses 18 and 19, he tells them again where to go. Go with me to verse 20. Matthew 26 and verse 20. When it was evening, he reclined at the table with the 12. And as they were eating, he said, Truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me. And they were very sorrowful and began to say to him, one after another, Is it I, Lord? He answered, He who has dipped his hand in the dish with me will betray me. The Son of Man goes as it is written of him. But woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better off for that man if he had never been born. Now listen to this, verse 25. Judas, who would betray him, answered, Is it I, Rabbi? He said to him, You have said so. My whole life, thinking about the first passages that we went to in John, where Jesus calls him out and says, You're the one that's going to betray me. At the end of that, he says, Whatever you're going to do it quickly. And at that point, I thought that was when Judas went out and gave over Jesus to the priest and had the exchange of money. But if you notice, in the other 3 passages that we read, Judas betrays Jesus before they go to the Passover feast. Verses 14 through 16, it talks about Judas meeting the chief priest, and he says, What will you give me if I deliver him over to you? And they paid him 30 pieces of silver. And from that moment on, he sought an opportunity to betray him. And in John it says, in a place absence of a crowd, where there's no crowd. And then we have the Passover meal. Maybe you've known this your whole life, but for me, I thought that that Judas was almost pointed out to at the supper. You're going to betray me. And then he goes out and betrays him. But in actuality, Judas gives over Jesus. Judas gives over Jesus to be killed before he sits down and he eats this meal with him. Now, I don't know what was going through Judas's mind when he was eating this meal. He had just given Jesus over to be killed, and then he sits and eats with the man. And then, in verse 25, Jesus, who would betray him, because they had been going one after another. Is it me? Is it me? Is it me? It comes to Judas's turn, and he says, is it me? And he had already done it. And he sat there, and he denied it. He didn't fess up to it. He said, is it me? Am I going to be the one to betray you? And Jesus said to him, you have said so. I think of how Judas's actions caused a man to be murdered. I think of how he was sitting at supper with his friends and with Jesus, and he was looking for an opportunity to give Jesus over. I do wonder what was going through Judas's mind. I wonder if he ever felt sorrowful. I wonder if he ever had any second thoughts. Or I wonder if he was just evil on the inside and he was just looking for an opportunity. I don't know. The two questions that I asked myself in thinking about the fact that Judas did this first and then ate supper with Jesus is that, number one, I wonder what would have changed if he would have told the other apostles. If he would have said, hey guys, I've done this. I shouldn't have done this. I'm sorry that I've done this. I'm struggling right now. And part of me thinks that those other 11 men would have done everything in their power to help him, to bring him back to God, to bring him back to being a close, honest friend to Jesus. And my second thought is, I wonder what would have happened when Jesus come around to him. And instead of Judas saying, is it me? Am I going to be the one? If he said, yeah, Jesus, I did it. I traded your life for 30 pieces of silver. And I'm sorry. And I shouldn't have. And I hope that you forgive me. I wonder what Jesus would have done. Jesus, being the loving and merciful person that he is, would have forgiven him, would have brought him back. And I think of myself and sometimes how I'm struggling or even drowning in sin, or I feel so far off from God. And people ask me, how are you doing? You doing okay? And I say, oh yeah, I'm doing fine. Just like I did with my parents and my grades. Oh yeah, everything's fine. In reality, I'm sitting here drowning, being far off from God. I think of Judas and how, if he would have been honest with his brothers, with his friends, or if he would have been honest with Jesus, I do wonder how his fate would have ended up after that, how things would have changed for him. But he didn't. He kept all those struggles and all of that sin to himself. So, thinking about that, I have two challenges for you this week. If you're struggling, and in reality a lot of us are struggling, with this whole coronavirus thing and I've heard a lot of ministers say that they don't feel like they're worth the paycheck that they're getting, and I totally understand that. Not being able to do events or go places or go to people's houses, or I struggle with that as well, with feeling that I'm not worth my paycheck sometimes. But if you're struggling with something, whatever it is, I pray that, number one, that you're honest with your brothers and sisters in Christ. Like I said, those 11 men would have done everything in their power to help Judas. And the church here at Leoma, or the congregation of where you're at, I'm sure if you were struggling that they would do anything in their power to help you and to bring you back to a close relationship with God. And number two, I pray that you're honest with Jesus about it. I think it's interesting that Judas, who would betray him, answered, "Is it I, Rabbi? Is it me, teacher?" And Jesus said to him, "You have said so." In reality, whether or not we're open with Jesus or not, whether or not we're forthcoming with our struggles to Jesus, He already knows. He knows what we're struggling with. He knows when we betray Him. He knows when we sin against Him. I pray that you're honest with Jesus and that you're forthcoming in your struggles with Him, because He loves you and He loves me and He loves all of us in our struggles. That's why He came and died for us. So, those are my challenges this week. If you're struggling, talk to someone and talk to Jesus about it. I love you. And I say this every time, but call me. Or call Rodney or one of the elders or deacons, or call somebody if you need any help. I love you and hope you have a great day.